Thank you so much for that warm welcome. I'm excited to be here with you guys today to talk about paganism. This is an interesting topic for me. I actually created this presentation, I think it was like 10 or 11 years ago, when a friend of mine asked me to speak about neo-paganism, and I thought, well, I don't know anything about Wicca or witchcraft, so how do I talk about this at a conference where I might end up having people who live that lifestyle come out? I am much more interested in archaeology, and so I have a lot of background in that area, personal research, not credentialed. And so what I ended up doing was looking at ancient paganism, and from there extrapolating the worldview, comparing it with the Christian worldview. And then in doing so, I ended up finding out that that worldview was actually coming back more in popular culture than we actually realized. So we typically think of paganism as these fringe groups of people who practice certain things that are on the edges of society, but they're actually much more prominent in Christianity today than we realize. Sorry, my clicker's not working. So what are we going to look at today? Well, paganism comes from the Latin word paganus, which means a village or country district, rural or rustic. So it actually has no negative connotation in its original form. It came to be known as one who is not enlisted in baptism as a soldier of Christ eventually, but it had no original negative connotation. It eventually became a differentiator between Christians and non-believers. One of the things that's really important about paganism is that there is a focus on cult acts and practices rather than revealed belief and theology. This is really important because it explains why the first century had such issues with Rome and Greece. Remember, the early Christians had trouble with Rome. They wanted them to perform emperor worship. Part of the problem was Rome didn't care what you believed. What they wanted you to do was perform the act. That's because in paganism, it's about the cult act. And by cult, I'm not saying anything negative or derogatory. In archaeology, the word cult is essentially kind of used synonymously with the word religion. So in paganism, cult rituals were more important than revealed belief, which also means there is no heresy. So what we're going to see is we're actually going to look at some of the things that we can identify by looking at their gods, the way they practice their religion, and through that we'll actually be able to extrapolate what is their worldview. Because action implies intention, motive, or purpose. And so there is an underlying worldview even if it's never explicitly defined. So how does paganism answer the worldview questions? The first question that we're going to talk about today is the nature of ultimate reality. What is ultimate reality? Is there a God? Are there multiple gods? Is material reality ultimate? What are the characteristics and attributes of those gods? How you answer this question ultimately ends up fleshing out as one of the main pieces of your worldview. In paganism, they have here is Persephone or Kore. She's the queen of the underworld, the god of the spring, fertility of vegetation. Next we have Hades, or he was called Pluto in Rome. He's the god of the underworld and defeated the Titans. Then we have Hermes, who's the messenger of the gods. He's the god of tricksters, the intercessor between mortals and the divine. He's the protector of travelers, herdsmen, and thieves. Nemesis is the god of divine retribution, vengeful fate, and revenge. In Egypt, we have Osiris, who's the god of the afterlife, the underworld, and dead. We have Set or Seth, who's the god of deserts, storms, disorder, violence, and foreigners. Now, this is not an exhaustive list, but from it we can extrapolate some characteristics. In paganism, it's polytheistic. Some recognize the supreme god, but they worship the lesser gods also. We have certain attributes or characteristics of these gods. They're fickle, they're changeable. We've got the gods of tricksters and thieves. They're limited in power, both in terms of location and operation. We've got gods of Egypt, we've got gods of Rome, we've got gods of Greece, we see gods in in the ancient, the Canaan area. But they're also limited in their operation. They're gods of the forest, they're gods of death, they're gods of the ocean and the sea. Or those are the same thing. The idea is they have power over one thing and not even geographically universal. They're impersonal and they're finite. This is very different from the Christian worldview, where we're monotheistic, which is to say that we only have one God. His characteristics are that he's unchanging, omnipotent, which is to say he's all-powerful. He's omniscient, which is to say that he knows everything. Omnipresent, which is to say that he's everywhere. He's personal, he's infinite, and timeless. Very, very different views of the divine between these two systems. What about the nature of material reality? This question has to do with the physical universe. Did the universe have a beginning? Is it eternal or temporal? Is it created and subject to the divine? Is it a manifestation of the divine itself? Is it ultimate reality? Well, let's look at the pagan worldview. The first one we have here is Gaia, the earth goddess, who emerged at creation along with the sea, air, and sky. She's the great mother of all and is literally thought to be the earth. Then we have Jupiter, the sky god, or the chief deity of state religions. He's the divine witness to oath and symbolized trust and justice. And he's literally thought to be the sky. In Egypt, we have Ra, or the sun god and creator. He's literally thought to be the sun. And Nut or Nuth, who is pictured arching over the image here, sometimes is represented with stars on the body. She is the sky goddess who's literally thought to be the sky. So what do we learn about the nature of material reality in this system? Well, in material reality, paganism, nature is a theophany. It's a manifestation of the divine. Material literally is ultimate. These two worldview questions have been collapsed into one. As a result, they end up worshiping the material rather than the creator of the material. But this also makes the universe chaotic and subject to the gods, because now the physical reality is personalities. So it makes them unable to be studied, which is something that you guys here at a scientific apologetics organization probably are very familiar with. The sciences are not possible in a world where the sky or the ocean or the environment around us is real personalities. It's only if that thing is subject to the creator rather than being a personality in and of itself that it has the regularity that allows it to be able to be studied. And so immaterial reality is subject to the whims of the gods, and we do share the same point in that it's temporal, which is to say that it's not going on forever, it had a beginning. Christianity, on the other hand, we say nature is a creation of God. We worship the creator of the material rather than the material itself. We recognize that it's fallen, however, but that it is maintained by God. So once again, very different ways of answering these worldview questions between paganism and Christianity. What is a human? The question is important because it affects not only how you view yourself, but as well as how you view other people. Are we highly evolved biological machines? Are we a higher evolution of animals? Are we created? Are we created in the image of God? Are we a special creation, an accidental creation? Are we valuable? Have we improved over time? All of these questions end up impacting how you view yourself, as well as how you'll end up viewing and interacting with other people. So what about in paganism? Well, in Egypt, we have the Atum creation narrative. Atum was a self-created deity. He was the first being to emerge from the darkness and endless watery abyss that existed before creation. A product of the energy and matter contained in this chaos, he created his children, the first deities, out of loneliness. He produced from his own sneeze Shu, the god of air, and Tefnut, the goddess of moisture. The brother and sister, curious about the primeval waters that surrounded them, went to explore the waters and disappeared into the darkness. Unable to bear his loss, Atum sent a fiery messenger, the Eye of Ra, which we saw a few minutes ago, to find his children. The tears of joy he shed on their return were the first human beings. So in this Egyptian creation narrative, mankind is a happy accident. We weren't created on purpose, though we weren't created from negative situation either. What about in the Greek creation narrative? In the Greek creation narrative, Zeus created 5 different types of humans, each type less powerful and less glorious than the previous. The final category of humans was what we know of humans as today. Prometheus, who was a titan that fought with the Olympians, liked mankind better than the gods, and so a battle of wills between he and Zeus ensued. Zeus created Pandora and her magical box of horrors in order to torture mankind and amuse the gods. Thus, in this Greek mythology, mankind was created for the amusement of the gods. What about in Babylon? The Babylonian creation narrative, there are 2 sets of gods. One finds the other irritating, and so they instigate a war. Tiamat, the mother goddess, is killed by Marduk, and from her body, Marduk creates the universe. From her co-conspirator, Kingu's blood, he creates mankind for the purpose of doing the work the lower gods disliked. Thus, in the Babylonian creation narrative, humans are created out of bloodshed for the purpose of laboring for the gods. What does this tell us about the pagan view of humanity? Well, in paganism, we do agree that we are creation. However, we're insignificant. We're either created to be servants, happy accidents, or for the amusement of the gods. So we're very insignificant in all of these worldviews. This is very different from the Christian view, where we're a special creation made in the image of God. And though we are fallen, we are still loved by God. This is really important and a really significant distinction when we circle back to this later and see how it's resurfacing. What has gone wrong? War, famine, plague, murder, disease. Every civilization around the entire world throughout all of history has recognized that things are not ideal. The way we deal with the gap between what ought to be and what is how we explain this particular question. Is this all that there is? Is this the pinnacle of evolutionary progress? Are suffering, pain, and misfortune just an illusion? Are the things the way they are because of some past transgression against God? These are all possible explanations for what has gone wrong. Well, in paganism, nothing ultimately has gone wrong. Misfortune, pain, and suffering are the result of a chaotic world. Why? Because they've collapsed their two ultimate and material reality questions together. And so they live in a chaotic world that's the result of physical manifestations being personalities. So you might be suffering because you have angered or have a mischievous God who has decided to inflict punishment on you. Or you might have mistakenly not pleased a particular God, and so you are receiving their wrath. Or, as we'll see in the next question, you might have had somebody enact a God to bring about a curse on you. And so everything that happens in reality, all of the things that have gone wrong are the result of persons that may not have reason or make sense why. This is very different than Christianity, where we say that all the suffering in the world is the result of sin having entered via transgression against God. Misfortune, pain, and suffering are the result of nature and humanity bearing the mark of this fallen state. And so we have very different answers between these two on this particular question too. Now, what is the solution? This is actually where we have the most amount of data when it comes to paganism, because this is all about cult acts. And so before we dive into that, what is the solution? This is all dependent upon how you answered the problem. So if we're at the pinnacle of the evolutionary process, then if nothing has gone wrong, then there's no solution other than to make the best out of life. If suffering, pain, and misfortune are illusions, then the solution is to detach oneself from reality in order to rise above the illusion. If there's some past transgression against God, a fall from grace, then there's potentially two different options. You could have a works-based solution, which allows you to rectify the situation, or you might have a grace-based solution wherein the deity does something in order to restore humanity for themselves. So let's dive into how this comes out in paganism. Sorry, 1 second. Well, there are a few different ways this ends up being manifested. The majority of what we're going to look at today is curse tablets. There also is human sacrifice, and we're not going to dive into this, but I do have the note on there that there was also cult prostitution was part of the way in which they found solving the problem. What are some of the gods that were involved in this? So we have Thoth, who maintains the universe, arbitrates godly disputes. He's the god of magic, writing, science, and the judge of the dead. We have Hecate, who's the goddess of witchcraft, night, new moon, ghosts, and necromancy. We have Kronos here, who's a Titan. He's the father of Zeus and the patron of harvests. We have an image here of him accepting a child sacrifice. We also have Hermes, the messenger of the gods. He's the intercessor between the mortals and the divine. Now, all of these gods and many more were recruited in order to be a part of the solution, but part of the way that this would be acted out and where we have a lot of data is through what we would call curse tablets. Now, traditionally, we tend to think of curse tablets as negative. In this culture, they didn't necessarily have negative or positive. You could use a curse tablet to bring about something positive, like to help somebody fall in love with you, or you could have it for revenge as well. So while we typically think of curses as negative, it was kind of a more neutral term depending upon what you were trying to enact. Some of them were focused on bringing about harm to others. Some are focused on bringing about the object of one's desires. They have a couple of different attributes. The first one that we're going to touch on is this thing called mystical words. The idea behind mystical words were that they were thought to be the language of the gods. And so this usually works better when I'm in South Africa and people are speaking a different language than me. But if I do not know Greek, imagine you all know Greek. If I were to say a Greek sentence to you then, and you knew it, you would understand what I was saying, even if I didn't. That's the idea behind mystical words. They're thought to be the language of the gods. So it doesn't matter whether or not you understand what you're saying. If you were to pronounce whatever the thing was correctly, then the gods would understand what you were saying and go about and do whatever the thing was that you were requesting from them. If you wanted a curse tablet, you'd go to your local curse tablet person who would put one together for you based upon whatever it was that you were trying to accomplish. They would focus on local customs and local beliefs to help you figure out whether or not what deity you wanted to bring about whatever the thing was that you were trying to accomplish. And so they would have specific recipes that they would use, and we see this like repeated out in curses that have like similar repetition from certain areas. There's a couple of different types of curse tablets. So there were some where the power expected to be in the actual words themselves, so those are the direct binding. So I bind such and such. The power was thought to be through the words themselves. We have prayer formulas appealing to the supernatural. So in these, they were actually like asking a god, or it was also thought that people's spirit would roam around either at the place of their death or the place where they were buried until the end of their natural lifespan if they had been killed either by violent means or very early. So it was thought that those spirits or the divine could help you bring about whatever it was you wanted. So prayer formulas appealing to the supernatural, those were usually enacting some sort of supernatural being to come and help you pull off whatever it was you were trying to accomplish. There's also persuasive analogies. So as this lead is cold and useless, so may X be cold and useless. The idea behind that was the analogy brought the power behind the particular curse. There were a variety of different places where we find curses. They were found in water, oftentimes, so in rivers, lakes, wells. If you wanted a particular god to help you in bringing about your curse, you might put it at their temple where they would worship. If you wanted your horse to win in a horse race, you might put it under the stadium floor. If you wanted someone to fall in love with you, you might put it at that person's house. We also find a variety of different things with curse tablets. So what we have here are some figurines that were found with curse tablets. These are actually found with love curse tablets. So I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want this person to love me. And so we find figurines, we find pieces of clothing, we find pieces of hair, all of the like things that went with the curse tablets. The idea behind them was that they were going to make the person that you were cursing present to the curse, similar to the way that a photograph in your wallet makes your loved one present to you even when they're apart from you. So the idea was that it would make them present to the curse. So that is all we have for curse tablets. Another interesting thing that is a part of paganism rituals, their solution to the problem, is child sacrifice. If curse tablets did not work or didn't bring about the object of your desire, a priest might perform a human sacrifice. Typically, I think these were more on a national level than a personal level. I think curses were more focused on a personal level. However, we see child sacrifice and human sacrifice in Phoenicia, Greece, Rome, and Egypt. The Phoenician god, referred to as Kronos or Moloch or Saturn, was regularly worshipped via child sacrifice. Outside of Carthage, there was a statue of a bull-like beast, which we see an image of it here, whose arms were outstretched. In the belly of the statue, a roaring fire was lit. The child would be placed in the arms of the beast and then slid into the fire to be burned up. The children were not forcibly taken from their parents, rather they were volunteered as an offering to the god. It's estimated that there were 20,000 children at least that were sacrificed at Carthage between 400 and 200 BC. So what is the solution in paganism? Well, since nothing is ultimately wrong, the goal is to make the best out of life. How we do that is we do it by manipulating our surroundings for personal gain. We do that with magic, placation of the gods, via occult sacrifice, ceremonial worship. And so the interesting thing about in paganism is, even though we have a variety of different ways that might be manifested, different kinds of curse tablets, different types of ceremonial worship, all of them, the human is the one who brings about the solution. I need to go and enact this curse tablet. I need to get a practitioner or a god to help me make some adjustment to my life, because there's nothing ultimately wrong. And so we don't have an ultimate solution. How do we compare this with Christianity? In Christianity, restoration of humanity's fallen state comes through Christ's death on the cross. Human acceptance and recognition of Jesus as Lord and Savior is what brings about the solution. And wherever you fall on the Calvinism, Arminianism scale is irrelevant, because in all of those, God is the one who brings about the solution on the cross. It's very, very different between paganism and Christianity. All right, so now we're going to get to the fun part. How is paganism resurfacing in modern culture? The interesting thing is our current political landscape is such that regardless of the political side one prefers, the world seems hopeless and on the verge of disaster. We have political superheroes who either need to be banished or destroyed. And it's really interesting, we're in an election season right now, and regardless of which side you talk to, it sounds very much like the gods between the battles that we're taking, the divine battles between the Titans and the Olympians, or between various nations. We have Democrats and Republicans who talk as though the other political opponent is like a demon that needs to be vanquished. And the only way that we're going to survive is if our political opponent or our political prospect is the one that gets into office. This is very interesting because it looks at our political environment as superhumans who are able to provide salvation, or if they're not able to get in, we're going to have doom. This is very much the same kind of idea with the superhuman beings that were the gods of ancient paganism. So in our own political landscape, we see the same kind of ideas resurfacing. Rather than focusing on God, who is one God who's over all of the issues, regardless of which side you are on, we kind of get in this battle cry and this rally behind one political opponent and think that the end of America as we know it, the end of the world will come if the other opponent manages to get into office. But this isn't only happening in our political landscape. There's a humanistic view of reality that's also coming inside of our church. Many churches preach a gospel so focused on Jesus' humanity that his divinity is lost. Many Christians believe in a God who is merely a more powerful superhuman, and much of contemporary culture paints God in our own image, which is evidenced by the arrogance with which we feel we can judge God's morality when we're embarrassed by his judgments against the Old Text, or his judgments in the Old Testament, and when we reinterpret the commands of God on sexuality. We speak of God's omnipotence as though it means that he has the most power rather than that he is the source of power itself. We minimize his omnipotence so that it appears as though we are comparing the relative heads of state rather than that we're speaking of that through which existence itself comes. We speak of God's omniscience and omnipresence as though he's a voyeur who has opened the roof of our home to spy in on what we're doing, rather than realizing that God does not need to peek through our curtains to know us. As the source of existence, he knows us more intimately than we know ourselves. At every second we exist, he is sourcing our existence. Existence itself for all beings at every moment flows forth from God, rather than something we have on our own right. We're not autonomous entities who can survive apart from God any more than we could survive apart from the blood. God is sourcing our existence just like our blood is sourcing life to our bodies. This is interesting because it also manifests in the view of students who I've had who focus on the purpose of Jesus taking on human flesh. I've had students that believe that Jesus took on human flesh so that he could understand us and feel what it was like to be us. Although Jesus did experience the reality of being human and that he had hunger and pain and temptation, this is not the reason that he became human. John 1 says that Jesus was a part of our creation. He did not have to become us in order to understand us or experience anything. He understands us better than we understand ourselves. Jesus became human in order for the judgment of God to be satisfied through humanity's sin. Only a human could pay the price for sin. Either we each pay the price eternally for ourselves, or someone from our species who is not a sinner and is infinite is able to pay that price for us. And that's the significance of Jesus' humanity. The belief that Jesus, his incarnation, was about teaching him something about humanity is the ultimate deification of humanity. To believe that the creator of life itself could be better off or could know something more by becoming a human is the reversal of the imago Dei into the imago hominis. It's paganism rising. What about material reality? The resurgence of paganism can also be seen in the contemporary view of material reality, whether you're speaking of science or spiritual natures, Mother Nature or naturalism. Our contemporary society desires material reality to be ultimate. Hyperenvironmentalism and hyperscientism are both two sides of the same coin. In both systems, nature is alive and brings about on its own all that is and ever will be, either by natural processes such as increasing evolutionary complexity in scientism or through fatalistic processes such as fate and Mother Nature in the spiritualized version. So this is not to say that scientific exploration is a pagan concept. For us to discuss, as we discussed earlier, the belief that the manifestation of the divine makes material reality subject to the whims of personalities and therefore unpredictable and unable to be studied. Nor does this mean that because some have deified science that it's a bad thing. Rather, it's to say that like everything else, contemporary empiricist science has its place. Prior to the materialism of the Enlightenment, science was considered the search for truth, whether or not it had empirical exploration or not. Theology, philosophy, all of these ideas were considered science as well. On the other side of the coin is the hyper-environmentalism that sends people into a panic over natural resources, earth core and ice cap temperatures, saving endangered animals, and the health of the rainforest. This is not to say that sensitivity to the health of our planet is bad. Rather, it's to say that our sensitivity to such things should not overshadow everything else. The Christian worldview states that when God created humanity, he instructed us to fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over it. It also says that the earth will end in fire. From these two things, Christians can glean an appropriate position on environmental activism. The first thing to note is that God instructed us to subdue and have dominion, which means we're expected to cultivate material reality and not abuse it. However, in those same verses, God says that he has given them to humanity for humanity's use, which means that protection of material reality should never be at the expense of that which is necessary for human survival. The earth is for humanity, not humanity for the earth. We're charged with caring for our environment, but the hyper-elevation of the environment, above all else, is a deification of material reality. Additionally, if the Christian can take heart that we cannot destroy the earth, we cannot end humanity by exhausting our natural resources or melting the ice caps so as to freeze the planet to death. If Christianity really is true, then its predictions about the end of the earth are true as well, and they should assuage any panic over environmental issues. Because if ultimate reality is the Christian God, and material reality is God's creation, then the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and those who dwell within, and we need not take on God's job. Both hyperscientism and hyperenvironmentalism make material reality ultimate. They claim that the universe is self-creating, though in different ways, and make material issues ultimate issues. Both of them deify material reality and elevate their approach to ultimate status, thus equating the scientific study of material reality and the protection of material reality with worship. What about the relationship of humanity? Our American culture does not value humanity. We just need to look at, if you walk down the grocery store checkout aisles, look at social media, or tune into any political hot topic, you can see that humanity is only considered as valuable as his or her contribution to society. Our magazines show men and women emphasizing their material attributes, whether they be physical or financial, with captions that reduce the opposite sex to no more than a plaything, whose attention can be won by changing what you wear, how much money you make, or what you do. If a parent doesn't value their child, they can get rid of their child either before or after birth. Medical treatments can be withheld that could have otherwise saved lives. If you're terminally ill, mentally ill, elderly, and you wish to die, rather than encouraging people of their value, and protecting those who need our help in society. Instead, we defend the right for people to die with dignity. In our post-Christian culture, mankind no longer has intrinsic moral value by being a person, because material reality is ultimate, and mankind is viewed as just a higher evolution of mammals, rather than the special creation of God that is espoused by Christianity. Humans are only as valuable as their contribution to society, and therefore intrinsically insignificant. Just like with ancient paganism, our contemporary answer to the question for what has gone wrong must be gleaned from our answers from the previous questions. Contemporary Western society views material reality as ultimate. Mankind is just the highest evolution of the natural processes, thus nothing has gone wrong. And actually, according to evolutionary theory, we're in the best part of history. Things have never been better than they are right now. What does that have to do for the solution? If nothing has ultimately gone wrong, and we're experiencing the best that history has ever had to offer, then there really is no ultimate solution to the pain and suffering that mankind experiences. The only option we are left with is to make the best of the life that we have through personal attempts to manipulate our surroundings. Evidence that we have bought into this idea can once again be found in our magazines as well as our social media, and turning into the advertisements on our television shows. We're regularly sold the idea that our problems will go away if we're thinner, more muscular, nip this or tuck that, make more money, buy more things, to get rid of our irritating spouse, or are free to express ourselves sexually without consequence with whomever or whatever we like, whenever we like. On a more communal scale, the wrongs we see take on an enormous amount of personal value, and so there is no real injustice, there is no ultimate justice, and so yet we see the injustices in the world in the form of the environment, abortion, sexuality, racism, immigration, sexism, freedom. But because there is no real justice in the world, we actually see these injustices and raise them and elevate them to ultimate status so that we become champions of these positions, whether or not we're willing to listen to people on any other side. And so we make this injustice, the ultimate injustice, our particular one that we find the most offensive, the ultimate injustice, and that we must solve this problem in order to solve all of humanity's problems. And so our solution becomes the ultimate solution. We become incapable of listening to one another and having dialogues to move the conversation forward. In all of these, we are wrestling with the idea that there is no really ultimate problem and no ultimate solution. We're answering the question in the same way that the pagans are. Where do we go from here? Well, the really cool thing about finding your present in the past is you also have the option to find a potential solution in the past. And so the early church had to deal with these things as well. The first thing I think is really important for us to flesh out is that hope is not lost. Christianity started with 500 people and became the official state religion of Rome within 300 years. If the tomb is empty, anything is possible. And so we do not need to worry that there is absolutely no hope. I think the next thing that we can draw from is that obedience and right belief are important. The first Christians did not have faith in the facts themselves. They reported what they knew because of what they saw. Their faith was in the implications of historically verifiable facts for them. So in other words, one of the examples I like to give is that when we talk about the resurrection, that Jesus lived at a particular time, was crucified by Rome, was reported to have been raised by the dead. We don't believe any of those things on faith. Those are historically verifiable pieces of information. What we take on faith is the implications of those historically verifiable facts for us. That Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection count for us in terms of eternity. We need to know why Christianity is true, and we need to know what Christianity is. And this is really important. It shouldn't just be a bunch of professional Christians who are responsible for knowing what Christianity is and why it's true. Every Christian in the early church was responsible for knowing these things. It was kind of a grassroots movement that made it possible for evangelism to be everyone's job. We live in a culture of professional Christians. We have pastors, we have elders, Sunday school teachers. You guys are all professionals at a ministry organization. So I'm kind of preaching to the choir here. But the idea is that everyone should be capable of having conversations that are evangelistic and able to defend their faith. Everybody should be equipped in a way that allows them to be able to go out and share. Because that's how the early church grew. Everyone knew what they believed and why they believed it, and they were able to then go share it. They may not have been able to answer all the questions, but they were able to answer enough of them that they felt confident to go out and share their faith. One of the other things that I think is really important is that they met people where they were. And so Jesus never required people to go clean up their lives and heal themselves before he came and ministered to them. He healed their problem, dealt with whatever their issue was, and then he went and said, and go and sin no more. And I think that's one of the things that in the church we're kind of, some do it better than others, is that we need to meet people where they are. So we need to feed the hungry, house the homeless, take care of the widows and orphans. These are a little bit controversial, so love the homosexual, take care of the woman who has had an abortion, befriend the transgender, have coffee with your political opponent, lend a helping hand to the sexually unrestrained. The idea behind this is that we need to be the kind of people that the people in these alternative lifestyles actually want to have a conversation with. Nobody really cares what you know or what you believe until they know that you care. And I think about myself, if someone from another religion or another position was going to come to me and only talk to me, and the only motivation they had was to change my mind, I would have absolutely no interest in talking to them whatsoever. But if they invest in me as a friend and they show me that I matter to them, regardless of whether or not I change sides and end up agreeing with them, then I'm willing to actually at some point end up having a conversation with them. And I think that's really important. We need to make sure that we are friends with and investing in the people and showing that they matter, even if they never come out of whatever their lifestyle is. And in doing so, we will earn the right to be able to have a conversation with them about the more difficult things. And so I think it's really important as a church that we're able to go out and do these things. But then once we get that platform, we need to make sure that we're sharing the gospel. So some churches lean into the felt needs of people and they never get to the gospel and the redemptive aspect. And some go so hard on correction that they never actually earn a place at the table to be able to have that conversation. And we need to find a way to balance the two. And so that is all I have for you today.